Hi, my name is Claire Victoria Sterling, and you're listening to another episode of Native as I Can Be with Geno Ray. Hope you enjoy this episode.
Who's the podcast host that you love the most? Coming to you live from coast to coast. Call me Thunderlip, Spaceman, or G. It's just me being native as I can be.
All right. Merry Christmas, everybody. It's actually November 20th right now, but because of the way things are scheduled, this should be coming out right around Christmas, which is perfect that my uncle has a Christmas tree up. And this person sitting next to me is my uncle Bill Ray. He's agreed to be on the podcast for the very first time, and I'm very excited about it. Even though I've known you my whole life, we haven't really sat down and talked for any extended amount of time. This would be kind of the first time.
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it and happy to participate in this new adventure that we're undertaking.
Thank you. So Uncle Bill is an enrolled member of the Klamath Tribe, and he grew up on a 160-acre farm in Estacada, which is not too far from where we're sitting right now. He spent some time in the Army. He went to U of O, OSU, Native organizations all across the Northwest. We're going to get into all of that. So my first question is, were you born in Chiloquin?
Yeah.
You were born in Chiloquin. And how old were you when you relocated to Estacada?
Well, I was born in Chiloquin. They had their own hospital at that time. This is way back in 1943. But when I was 13 months old is when I came to Estacada.
You and my dad went up to Estacada, right? Okay.
At the same time that he was a year and a few months older than I, but we came together.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about your dad or your mom? Banjo and Pearl, as I know.
Yes. Very little. Used to have visitation when we were very young.
Yeah.
Probably 2 or 3. But for some reason that never really worked out very well. It wasn't an ongoing kind of contact that I had while I was growing up.
My dad said he remembered your dad would come every once in a while and just take you on drives, different places. That's about what he remembered about your guys' dad is every once in a while he'd come and pick you guys up and drive somewhere. And then
Who would drive?
Joe, your dad would pick you guys up when you were little kids. And
I remember driving. I remember one incident. It wasn't more than 2 or 3 that I didn't know how a car operated, but on the dashboard there was a little red light for high beam or low beam.
Yeah.
And then I would push the button and then he would switch control so that the light would either come off. I don't remember which way it went. And I remember that as being very amusing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not much of a memory, but I do recall that specifically.
Yeah. So the family on the farm in Estacada was the Deuce family, right?
Correct.
And do you remember, or were you ever told why you were living with them and not with your birth parents or birth dad or birth mom? Was there any discussion about that?
They were, it was a certified foster care home. You just can't become a foster care home just out of nowhere. There's a certain process you have to go to be certified as one. What I generally understand is that my birth mother and father were unable to take care of children.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we were placed in foster care.
Yeah.
They had trouble taking care of themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's
let alone children.
She was in her 30s when she died, I think, and he was in his 40s, maybe. both had their
I
problems.
think that she passed away while I was in high school, but I had really no mental or emotional connection to that.
Yeah.
And I remember when Banjo died, I had just entered the Army at that time, and I was at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
I think they call it something else now. And received notice from the Red Cross that he had passed away, or no, was very ill and
Mm-hmm.
was on the verge of passing away. So I left basic training, came down to the Veterans Hospital in Portland to visit, and there was a short visit. I went back to the base, and then about a week later, I returned to not to visit it, but to attend the funeral service of it. Willamette National, which is a veterans cemetery in Southeast Portland.
Yeah. It's off of I know where it is. Yeah. So what was your what are some of your earliest memories living on that farm? And what was your kind of day-to-day like living there?
Two things come to mind right away. Sitting next to a Christmas tree, because we had an old homestead farm, we had plenty of acreage and wild trees would grow. And we used to go out with our axe and saw or whatever we needed and pick our tree out from the field. And I remember doing that. And this was long before Christmas trees became a crop, where they're planted in rows and everything,
Right.
in that diagonal and everything. These are just trees that happen to grow up on their own. And I remember doing that. And the other thing I remember was I just mentioned to you before the interview started that we have wood burning stove. We grew up in a house that had wood burning stove.
Yeah.
We used to spend time getting wood, splitting wood, making kindling out of cedar, and getting ready for the winter, make sure the woodshed was stocked full of wood. But there was always something to do, farm of any size, especially if you had animals.
So were there other kids staying there too?
Yes, there was a girl who came. She was about 3 or 4 at the time that she came. She came around the same time that our brother Gene did. So we grew up as like brother and sister.
Mm-hmm.
But over the years, there was probably 20-some kids who needed foster placement, either temporary or more. That's how I grew up, with other kids coming and going.
But you stayed for the duration.
I always like to say, I'll tell you a funny story. One year I was attending the 40th anniversary, I think it's the 40th anniversary of my graduation from high school in Estacada.
Mm-hmm.
And they would ask me, well, where are you living at the time? And they would say, I said, well, I'm still living at home. And they thought that was funny because most of the students my age then were married and on their own and doing things and had their family. And I finally said, well, no one said I had to leave, so I just stayed. But that was part of what for me was successful as a foster placement. It did feel like,
That's good.
so in my heart and mind and with mom and dad that raised me, they were my mom and dad. They weren't my foster mom or my foster dad.
Yeah. A lot of adoptees, and I know you weren't an adoptee, but um, they have a feeling of displacement, or especially if the parents adopt them, but then the parents have birth children and then they're the adoptee, or a lot of things can be really tricky about that dynamic. So it's good, and I definitely think it benefited you that you felt really close to them and they felt like your mom and dad.
They had children of their own, but they're about 20 years older, so they're like a generation older, and they had already left home for school with the service.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't grow up with their biological children.
The Deuces, what were their first names?
Mom's name was Isabel. She didn't have a middle name, and her main name was English. And she grew up in that area on a neighboring homestead farm, the John English farm. And then she married Ernest Deuce, which was the side of where I grew up. And his name was Ernest August Deuce. And he was of German extraction. His family settled in the 1816 or something. They came over from Germany. I don't think they came around the tip of South America. They might have come through the canal. I don't know. And then Mom's family was Irish, and they came directly to the United States and came to Kansas for a while before they moved to Oregon and homesteaded. You had the Deuce farm and the English farm, and then Mom and Dad married each other. So the English farm actually became the Deuce farm by name.
Yeah. Well, me and my dad were very close. What was your relationship like with him coming up? Were you guys pretty tight? Were you guys?
I think we were close. I
Yeah.
remember going to a lot of activities together. We grew up going to the Molalla Bucker.
Yeah.
The big annual activity in the neighboring town of Molalla. And on occasion, we would go into Portland to the Rose Parade. That was more of a family event. Two, as I recall, was more into sports. I think he played football and some other sports activity.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't a sports person.
Yeah. Like what?
And crafts,
Okay.
singing and music, and more the creative side of things to do.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get into that in a second here. So did you go to college before or after you enlisted? After. So you enlisted first.
So right out of high school, I went to Oregon State University.
Okay.
And I was down there for a number of years. And then I would join the Army. And then when I returned, I went down to the U of O. But when I joined the Army, it was September of 1967. And that was during the height of the Vietnam era war. But anyway, it was a war.
Yeah.
And I found out later that one of the reasons I did not go to the Vietnam was that a lot of the enlistees at the time who had college education behind them were not sent. Some were, some weren't. I spent my time in Germany.
Did you enlist or were you drafted in?
I was on a list to be enlisted. I was on a list to be. I joined.
Yeah. Got ahead of it a little bit. Yeah. So you said that was 67. So what was it like going from a homestead in rural Oregon to Germany?
I had actually been there once before.
Oh, you had? Okay.
A couple of years before that. I got in Germany in March of 1968. Once you spend time in basic training, then we went to a trainee school, which was in Virginia. So I was someplace back in the state of Virginia for maybe 5 months. Then you're assigned to your duty spot, and mine happened to be Germany. But I had been there 2 years ago, 2 years prior to that, when I was on the tour with another older sister from the Deuce family, because she had spent time in the special services in Germany, and so we went back and visited her old stomping grounds, and I got to see places that I had not seen before.
So when I was in the Army, it was called an MOS. So you went to basic training and then you went to they call it AIT, which was your advanced individual training. So I was a communications specialist. We would go up on a hill and crank up these big antennas, and then people could run a cable up to our shelter and they would have comms. What was your training in Virginia?
It seems so distant now, but what they called it was stock control and accounting. And if you look back in your ancient history, there was early computer work where they had these cards that was about the size of an envelope that had all the little holes punched in them, which was how you communicated. So that's what I did. So you can enter data so there was a machine that would punch out the little pieces of paper.
Yeah. And then it would
feed it into a computer.
Yeah. It was like early coding, basically.
Yeah.
So when you got to, how worried were you? Well, you just said they weren't really sending college-educated people to Vietnam. Was that? So were you worried about going, or were you feeling lucky? How did you feel?
I was fortunate to be assigned to Germany under those circumstances. So I would consider myself fortunate and didn't ask why.
Right.
But you can still feel sympathy for the people that did go, and those, especially that didn't return home.
Right.
Because the town that I was at, it's called Kaiserslautern, which is on southwestern part of Germany. The army base was on one side of town, and on the other side of the town was the Air Force Base. I'm assigned Air Force Base, and that's where they brought in the medically wounded or those that were near death to try to save them. Fortunately, many were returned home in body bag.
Right. Where they saw so much while they were there, they were never the same when they got back.
That's what I could say.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what people still suffering from it.
Yeah. So at this time, are you let's see, are you sort of proudly rocking your Native heritage? Or is this a time where that sort of thing was maybe we better not say anything? Like what were you kind of how were you identifying?
I didn't really become more conscious of the decisions I made regarding being closer to my Native American background. That didn't really come about till I was around 30.
Okay.
when I was finishing school, and it's time to get a job. There are opportunities then. There's a lot of programs available through national legislation. The National Indian Education Act was one of them, and they provided funding to different school districts around the country. And Portland had just received some funding to open their Indian education office. And I went to work in that office in one of the projects they were working.
One of the questions I get asked most when people find out I'm Native is they will almost always say, "Oh, don't you guys get to go to school for free?" No, the answer is no. It may be, I know with our tribe, they have on a couple of occasions helped me pay for books, but it's dependent on the tribe. It's depending on the temperature in the country at the time. It depends on a lot of things, but there's not a universal rule that every Native just gets to go to school for free. So let's clear that up real quick.
That's correct. But however, there is a system of the American Indian Consortium of Higher Education. So there are programs and colleges available around various reservation areas where college is offered and available for those wishing to attend.
Yeah, and certain
outside the public school system.
Yeah, and certain disciplines are encouraged more than others. You know, if you want to get into the healthcare field and if you plan on staying on the reservation, there's a lot of different things like that that do make it easier to go to college. But it's not a free ride necessarily.
Nothing.
No. What about just your military time? What about that has stuck with you? I mean, you don't have a bed that you can bounce a quarter off of or anything like that, right? Maybe.
No. What I remember most, probably just I had some friends that I don't see them, but I remember being able to. I remember the people I associated with. I was at a tire shop the other day. No, it's a pizza shop here in locally, and I asked the person where he was from. He said he was from Iowa. And I said, I remember someone from Iowa back in the day of the service. So they had an opportunity to meet people from different parts of the state. And I remember this one sergeant asked me where I was from, and I said, Oregon. And he said, well, he was from Texas. And at that particular time, I said, well, I've never been to Texas. And he says, you what? Like, how backward can you get? You've never been to Texas.
Yeah.
But I have since, so I was able to achieve that goal. So to answer your question, just remembering different people that you met and where they came from.
Yeah. And I experienced that in basic training myself. I had never been around anybody from the South. You know, I had spent most of my life up until that point in Oregon or Arizona. And we're in basic training, and people with these really thick accents, we're talking about musicians from New York City. And it blew my mind because this guy with this really thick Southern accent was, you know, he was like, well, I like this guy, and I like that guy, and I like that guy. And I was like, what? And I'm like, well, he's my age, and those are all the people I like, and I have never been anywhere close to New York City. So it was a kind of an eye-opening experience that, oh, these people are just like me, you know, and it's easy to kind of have some barriers up when you think a certain way.
One of the things to remind me of, speaking of exposure to different parts of the country. At one of the restaurants when I was in Virginia, they provided grits.
Grits. Yeah.
I've never eaten grits in my life, so at least I tried them.
Yeah.
And then because on my time off on the weekends, I like to travel and go around and do different things. I went down to Williamsburg, and they provided some meals that would have been reminiscent of the early founding of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Williams was a nice setting for historic architecture and political history.
They're really colonial type establishments, I think.
But it's still a very popular place.
So we kind of touched on it a little bit, but did being in Germany give you just a different perspective on Oregon, on the world? Did it open your eyes to anything?
I remember Christmas time reminded me of home a lot. And it was celebrated over there, much like we do here. And the other thing was the rain. It reminded me of being in Oregon. And the other thing was there's some geographical areas that remind me of a place near Oregon City, because there's a lot of little hills and rivers and what's like in Oregon. So there's a lot of similarities that I was able to see and identify with.
How much German did you know? But how many years were you there?
About 2 years and
2 years and 2 months.
It's just over 2 years.
How was your grasp on German by the time you left there?
I attempted to speak the language. It wasn't, I wouldn't call it successful.
Yeah.
But there were enough people that spoke English. It wasn't imperative that I learn the language. I did make an effort.
Yeah. I picked up a little bit when I was in South Korea. They call the language there Hangul. And every once in a while, it'll come back to me. I'll remember a word.
Hangul?
Yeah.
I've never heard it.
The name of the language they speak in South Korea. Yeah, and every once in a while, I'll remember a phrase or a word. Yeah, I wasn't really making much of an effort to learn. So that last day, or when you got your orders that you were going home, what was that feeling like? Were you relieved?
When I was getting to be discharged.
Yes.
I was relieved. Yes, I was happy to come back. In fact, you can request an early 90-day early leave or departure or discharge. And if you're signed up for college classes, and that was one of the reasons I chose University of Oregon. I signed up for a couple of classes so I could return during the summer.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. And you came right back to Oregon after that.
Estacada.
Back to Estacada, yeah. So
I was home for about 6 months, and then I took the journey down to Eugene.
Yeah.
January of 1971.
And you had already achieved your first degree at Oregon State, or?
I did not have a degree at Oregon.
Okay.
But I did return for graduate school.
Oh, okay. So the degrees you were in art education.
Mm-hmm.
What was your plan with an art education degree? And what drew you to that as a major to begin with? You said you were into kind of creative stuff when you were younger. Was it just an extension of that?
I enjoyed it because I wasn't an athletic person. I had a creative streak in me that sort of developed to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you want to teach art classes, or what were you going to do?
I did. And my first job was working, as I mentioned, in Portland, was the Portland School District, the Indian Education Act office. And what I did that first year was they had a mobile classroom. It was a 28-foot long motorhome, and it was called the Whale. That's what they're
Whale.
the Whale, because it had on each side of it, it had in a Northwest Coast design, the image of a killer whale painted on the.
Yeah.
So the schools would call up our office and say they'd like to request a visit of the whale.
Send the whale.
And then students would come out classroom by classroom and visit. And I had set up a little audio visual media presentation and things to demonstrate. So that was kind of what I did that first year.
A lot of audio visual presentations. And was that sort of like a recruiting tool of sorts to?
More of an introduction to Native culture.
Introduction. Okay. And is this kind of when you started to really not get in touch, but maybe explore Native identity a little more?
Made me more interested in getting involved with the Native culture was getting involved in politics. Because I was interested in more the arts craft areas. I found out that most of the work that is done with tribes is done on a political basis.
Right.
And I don't mean Republican, Democrat, although that's certainly a part of the whole equation. But the tribe's relationship with the state and the federal government has ran the course over the years. I learned that it's very important to be sort of politically involved.
Right.
And be able to speak up on behalf of your tribe or whatever issue you might have. I mentioned legislation. During the 70s, there's a lot of national legislation involving Indian tribes that hadn't taken place before. So there are more opportunities to get involved and to do things. The Indian Child Welfare Act was one.
Yes.
Which touched upon the Indian education, protection of the natural resources. In the case of the Klamath tribe, of which we are members, along with many other tribes here, just in the state of Oregon, they went through a process of termination, and which they lost their land base and are no longer recognized as a governmental entity, which tribes are. And it took them, and that was way back in the 1950s. And it wasn't until the 1985 or 86 that the tribe received their federal recognition. And I just happened to be on there, not just happened, I was asked to serve on the Tribal Restoration Committee to get the tribe restored, which was quite an honor at that time.
Yeah, I'm going to do a whole deep dive on the termination because it is a very complicated story and there's a lot of, like you mentioned, kind of the politics of things. There was, some kind of backdoor deals that seemed to be happening at the time. And there's stories about, members of the tribe basically getting, not really settlements, but they're kind of getting they're getting money for the land that they're giving up, and then the papers are running stories, about these wild Indians running around with paper bags full of money and wrecking cars, and it's a really long, complicated story. And like he said in '86, that federal recognition was restored, and now every year in Klamath Falls, Chiloquin, our tribe has what's called the Restoration Powwow, which was what me and Che go to every year, and it's a big part of me and his whole dynamic is this powwow we go to every year. But it's a very complicated, messy story, and it's really cool that you were on the restoration committee. So what was that like when you guys finally achieved the goal of getting recognition back?
Well, I think there was 10 of us on the committee at that time. The purpose was to go back and introduce the tribe or the issue to the different congressional people on the House and the Senate. So we went back, I can't remember the months, but we went back there and met with individually with our Oregon delegation and some other members who happened to be on the Indian Select Committee on Indian Affairs and the House Committee on Indian Affairs. So we met with the people who were in a position to decide to vote for the restoration. And eventually it ended up on the desk of Ronald Reagan, who signed most of the restoration legislation for tribes here in Oregon.
Yeah, it's the story goes that before termination, the Klamath tribe was one of the wealthiest tribes in the country, and one of the only tribes at the time that was paying their dues, or whatever the proper terminology would be, to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And after termination became one of the poorest tribes in the country. So it had a very devastating effect, which I think was the point, if you were to ask me. But
A very unfortunate time for many families in that area.
yeah. Yeah, I really want to get into that someday. What other kind of Native organizations or committees or different kinds of hit kind of the highlights, the ones that you were really, really the most proud of the work you did, civic organizations and what have you?
Oh. The Oregon Legislative Commission on Indian Services, which was established in Salem back in 1975, I believe, by then Governor Victor Attia. And he was very much attuned to the needs of the Native people here in the state of Oregon, and set up this legislative committee. Because it was a legislative committee, it remained a part of the structure of the legislative process, and it's still in existence today. And so tribes are represented in all 9 federally recognized tribes. There's a tribal representative from the Portland area, which I served as. I think one from Salem and one from Eugene, one state senator and representative on the commission. And they meet, I don't know how often they meet now, but they meet now considering different pieces of legislation vetted before the legislature.
So at some point, did it kind of hit you, maybe during college or after, when you're working with different organizations? Was there a point where you were like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing?
This is or isn't?
Is like doing this, serving my people, making a difference, being a voice for voiceless people. Was there a point where you're like, this is it, I'm doing what I should be doing, this is why I'm here?
I never really looked at it like that. I enjoyed what I was doing. That kind of made me feel good about what I was doing and what my efforts were. And one of the other organizations I worked with, let's say, one of the early Native organizations in Portland was is one of the social service programs, Urban Indian Council. And that was in existence for quite some time. That's when more funds were available for tribes who lived in the urban area could get together and speak to the different needs, and that was a very active time
Yeah.
on social issues, whatever that might be.
This would have still been in the 70s then? Or would this be 80s?
I think it started in the 70s. The little organization started, I think, in the 70s. With the Native American Native American Youth Association. It started out back then as starting a basketball game, recreation activity. And then now it's a huge organization with over 100 staff people and board of directors. They have their own school, campus.
Mini Nations Academy, I think, is the name of the school. Yeah. That's another one me and Che do every year, is the powwow there at NAIA. That's a good one.
There is a kind of a funny story. I've told it before, but I did a lot of volunteer work, and I was at an organization, social gathering once, and I met the director of that organization at that time and asked what they needed other than money. And he said, we need a van driver, someone to pick up the students from the school, bring them to our office where they can participate in the different activities, and then take them home, be responsible, and get them home safely and everything. And I said, well, I could do that. So I actually signed up and was a member of the staff for about 6 months. And I picked up students from various schools, brought them to the and they did their activities, and I brought them home.
Yeah.
And then I told the director at the time, this is probably not what I meant to do. And then I was invited back to be on their board of directors there, and eventually selected as the chairman of the board. And the students used to say, didn't you used to be the van driver? And now you're chairman of the board? Yeah.
Yeah. See, you apply yourself and good things happen. See, I should be name dropping Uncle Bill here because he knows everybody in town. I should be dropping his name and getting in places. I do think NAIA would be another good topic for a podcast and get some people talking there.
They're an actually excellent organization.
Yeah.
So I think that would be very nice.
And because I think the Many Nations Academy is a really cool, I think that's probably the direction I would want to go. Stay tuned for part 2.